Okay, so Subhadramati finished the story. We've been telling the Buddha's story, the life story of the Buddha, for the last few weeks. And yeah, we've been emphasising that we're not particularly focusing on the history, the facts of it, as it were. Not that they're much known. Really, we're talking about prehistory with the Buddha's life, 2,500 years ago. What we're doing is exploring the story, capital S, and seeing its mythic significance. When we say something has mythic significance, what we really just mean is it has universal significance. It is saying something about the deepest patterns of life. That's what mythic significance really is. Some of these words sometimes, I think, almost cloud one. We're really just saying that life has within it deep patterns, deep shape. And the myth, any genuine myth, if you understand it, if you can understand its language, is touching on that deep shape. Yeah? And that's what we want to do with the Buddha's life. Not so much say, what research has shown and so on, but what the story reveals about ourselves, about the shape, as it were, the outline of spiritual life. Yeah. So that's what I want to talk about. Yeah, so I do. By the way, my name is Maitreya Bandhu. Hi. Sorry about that. I've been here a long time. So I do a lot. I do a lot of teaching, and it's one of the things that really brings a lot of value and meaning to my life is teaching. I quite often meet up with people, and we talk about things that we've been talking about here at the centre. And recently, I had a coffee with someone who's recently coming along to the centre, and one of those great. Sometimes when conversation really goes, so often I don't know whether you find this. You're sort of slightly trying to find if there's something genuine to talk about that actually is going somewhere. So easily that conversation is just sort of, just doing that thing, a mutual monologue, just sort of, you're waiting for them to stop until then you can talk, So often conversation easily doesn't really go anywhere. It's very easy for that to happen, isn't it? Or not go anywhere substantial. I remember even when I was very small, having this sense I wanted conversation to get somewhere, not just be the stuff that you say. It's very easy just to say the stuff you say. And that stuff you say can be the Buddhist stuff you say as well, which is just as boring as any other stuff you say, just because it's Buddhism doesn't make it special. Anyway, I was chatting to this guy, and he... just such a great conversation. It was really the highlight of my whole weekend. Really such a great conversation. Really mainly due to him, I think. Just asking very real questions, very genuine questions, and really listening to the answers and thinking about them. And we thought together. So often when we talk about thinking, we need to think in terms of thinking together. I think one brain isn't usually enough, especially to think deeply. You need more than one. Yeah. Partly what we're doing here, we're trying to think together. Anyway, at one point he said to me, so what motivates you to practice? What motivates me to be a Buddhist? I've been practicing here at the centre for 30 years or something like that. And I originally, first of all, said, helping people, I think, is what motivates me. Of course, you say something like that and you think, that sounds a bit too good. A bit too good to be true. Although I think it is true, actually. I think that is one of the things that very much motivates my life now. I want to be of some help, some genuine help. Helping people is much more difficult than it seems. Sometimes the best way to help people is not to try to help them. The worst way to help them is to try and sort out their problems in that dreadful way that we can so easily get into. But genuinely helping people is the meaning of life, it seems to helping them in every way, really. So that does motivate me. But but I sort of didn't quite believe myself. And he was saying, what was it particularly that struck me when I first came here, when I was 29 or something. No, I wasn't. That's 20. Not very good numbers. 20, 25. Similar. And I suddenly thought, actually, that came later, this helping people thing. What really grabbed me at first, when I first came to the Buddhist Centre, is that there's something to do with life. That's really what, even from my first night here on a Wednesday night, about October time of year, when I was at art school, I was 25. I got here and just being taught meditation, what really struck me is that there's something to do with life, something real to do with life. Yeah, I'd been very unhappy as a young man and as a child even. There was all kinds of reasons for that. One of the reasons was I couldn't see what life was for. I knew it would be good to be happy, but I didn't have any good reason to be happy. That wasn't enough for me. I thought it would be good to be happy, but that didn't motivate me to be happy. And it still doesn't, actually. I just don't find that a motivation. I'll be happy if other people need me to be. But just to be happy for myself, it's nothing saintly, it just doesn't motivate me. I think it'd be nice, but it doesn't motivate me. But I really got this sense that life is for something. There's something, or the way I put it to this friend is, there's something to do with life. Something to do with life. And what I mean by that is that life has, sounds terribly grandiose, but life has transcendent meaning and purpose. There is something real to do with it. There is something to do with your life. Human life, there's something real to do with it. I had this sense, even as a young man, that so much of what we did was just whistling as you walked past the graveyards, whistling in the dark as you walked past the pretending that life doesn't end with death, and therefore getting on with a career and a family and jobs and all. Nothing wrong with any of that stuff. But didn't feel like something to do with life. It just felt like something to keep going, something to whistle. So I think when I came to this centre, without quite it being said, and of course it's said by this figure as much as anything, but without anyone saying this is something to do with your life, that's what I felt immediately is I've got something to do with life. And then doing that, trying to do that something, happiness, if to the degree it appears, and it doesn't appear with everyone in the same way, but to the degree it appears as a byproduct of that something to do. I think many people suffer from this deep sense that there isn't really anything to do with life. It's not really for anything. You're doing stuff, but that's a different thing. It's difficult really to quite get the tenor of it. Anyway, this sense of not knowing that there's anything to do with life, anything to do with my life, genuine, really kind of played a part in my sort of unhappiness. It wasn't the only part, there was all kinds of other things as well. So when we think of a transcendent ideal, again, slightly posh language, what it means is that there is a genuine goal to life which lies beyond the normal range of consciousness and lies beyond egotism. Egotism really is the same old thing in Brand New Drag, isn't it? As Iggy Pop said. I keep saying note my contemporary reference. It's not very contemporary, but anyway, still. This friend I was talking to at the weekend, he was telling me about a book he read. He said, it's really old. I'm thinking, oh gosh. And he said it's like 1980 or something. I thought he was going to say 1460, so this something to do is to do with there being a genuine transcendent meaning to life that goes beyond my life, this bounded life between birth and death, goes beyond who I think I am, goes beyond what I like and doesn't like. goes quite outside of the picture that I call life. You see what I mean? When we say life, that grand abstraction, we have a kind of picture of me in time and space, in a world, really existing world, really existing time and space, really existing me, and one day that me bit is going to be rubbed out and everything else will continue. Yeah? So when I say a transcendent ideal, it sounds rather sort of Victorian and grandiose. What it means is something outside of that whole box, with me in the middle of it, a kind of computer called me, making sense of a box I call the world. I felt when I came here that that wasn't all there was. Even when you say outside of all that is a metaphor, I don't mean that there's a heaven that's literally outside this world. I don't think there is. It's much more like there's a wholly other, as it were, explanation for everything that happens. I was struck recently by Einstein's watch. His little way of putting it is that you have a wristwatch and you deduce from what you see the numbers and the time, and you work out how it's done. You have all sorts of ideas about how that works, that thing called time. But he was saying that the thing about reality is that's what we do. We look at it, we take all sorts of understandings from it, we come up with all kinds of theories and beliefs and assumptions from that watch face, but you can never open the back. And he was saying there could be a completely other explanation for what you see, if you see me, but you can never open the back. You can never, in our case, you can never get outside of consciousness to see what it is. So by transcendent and ideal, I mean something that goes beyond, which is a metaphor, the world as we take it, with ourselves as a really existent being in that world. It's not literally beyond, it's a metaphor. Doesn't mean that we're in this world and there's like, next door there's heaven. Or next door but one probably. Down a little alley. Yeah, so there's three basic ways of thinking of that transcendent other, or there's three different ways of relating to that. I was reminded of this just recently, which is you either think that there is this transcendent other and you need to make progress, change yourself so you get closer and closer to it. Yeah, Buddhism is very strongly like that. There is a goal, and it's usually just simpler to say the goal is the Buddha figure. This figure represents the goal. Outside, inverted commas, time and space, self and world, and so on. There's another way of understanding how the watch face, completely different way, that makes sense of everything, but not in the way that you tend to think. There's another kind of consciousness. And that the Buddhist path is a progress towards that. So you could see that's the myth of self-development. Yeah. Another way you can imagine it is that actually what you've got is an already existing Buddha somewhere hidden within you, within consciousness, and what you need to do is uncover that. It's sort of already there, but you don't know it's there. And Buddhism uses this metaphor as well. There's a famous metaphor about a drunken having a priceless jewel sewn into his coat. And the metaphor is that actually you've got incredible wealth right next to you, on your person, but you just don't realise it. He doesn't realise it. He goes off, gets lots of rubbishy jobs, suffers, is unhappy, doesn't realise that he's actually incredibly rich, never realises it. So you could think of that then as a myth of self-discovery, that you discover something that you didn't realise you had. Yeah, and that something is this priceless. It's always a priceless jewel, or the Buddha figure. It's enlightenment itself. I was just talking to Young just earlier, who very much more aware of Korean Buddhism, and that's much more the metaphor in Korean Buddhism is that there's something already there. But you don't know it's there, you need to uncover it. So that's the myth of self-discovery. Yeah? The other way, of course, is that there is a transcendent meaning and purpose to life. The Buddha, the wish-fulfilling gem, all sorts of Buddhist languages that talk about it. And what you need to do, what all we can do, is surrender to it. There are also traditions of Buddhism that particularly draw this out. Pure Land Buddhism especially draws this out very much, that you need to surrender. You can't do anything yourself. You can't think in terms of making progress. You need to surrender to an existent, as it were, transcendent ideal. You need to believe in it, surrender to it, let it affect you. Yeah? Subhuti, when he talked about this, who's our president, he was saying that you could even put these in terms of Western history, so that the myth of self-surrender, you could call that the myth of self-surrender. So the myth of self-surrender is the basic pre-modern assumption that wherever the West is, at least in my childhood, the West of Europe, you've got the assumption that transcendent figure is God. And what you need to do is subject yourself to God's will. You need to be obedient to his will. I'm reading Paradise Lost at the moment and get a real sense of that. You need to submit. You need to open to that. Yeah, and that's very much a kind of pre-modern idea. And it's been doesn't mean to say it's out. It doesn't mean to say it's not valid. Actually, it's very valid still. In fact, I think we need probably much, much more of that. A modernist idea is that progress is possible. Yeah. It's very much a modernist idea, isn't it, that you can make progress. When I first came along here, I was at art school, and of course, I did a bit of history of art. And what you study in history of art is a sort of, well, you used to in those days anyway, a kind of linear idea of progress. On the basis of Cézanne's great discovery, you then create the basis for Cubism, which then Picasso and Braque particularly take forward, and on the basis of that you then get Vortism. On the basis of Vortism you then get, I can't remember what was named, you end up with minimalism and then so on. That's all rather out of fashion now, movements as it were, but that whole idea of a movement is that somehow history shows you some kind of progress, that you're getting more and more sophisticated. Yeah. So you could say that the myth of self-development is a modern, for us it would be a modernist idea. A postmodernist idea is that the myth of self-discovery, that actually it's already there somehow and you need to discover it. It's interesting how many talent shows there are at the moment. It's really effectively the myth of self-discovery. So, I can sing, and suddenly, wow, I'm a superstar. But you didn't know, it's just there. Anyway, it's a very strong myth, isn't it? What was that woman who sang that song?
Suzanne Boyle?
Yes, famous, is it Susan Boyle? Yeah. Very famous little YouTube clip, at least, where, everyone thinks that, and she suddenly sings, and she's fantastic, really fantastic, yeah. So the myth of discovery. But good heavens, I open my mouth and I'm fantastic. Actually, that's fairly rare. But you actually open your mouth and think, yeah, I'm not fantastic. In fact, your friends will ask you to desist. When I was young, I used to play the trombone. I was practicing the trombone, and I don't know why I'm telling you this. And my family used to have these large Alsatians, and one of them, the youngest, as soon as I started practicing, I could hear him run up the stairs as fast as possible, knock his way into the room because he could open the door with his nose like that, knock his way in the door, come and sit at my feet and howl. And there's me trying to play. And this great big Alsatian, I looked for eyes for the wolf, she was sitting next to me and howl. I didn't know whether we were doing a duet or whether it was a complaint. It looked like a complaint, actually. So I didn't discover talent, yeah. But all of those modes... the myth of surrendering yourself to an ideal. That's a very valid myth as long as you understand what you're doing. Of course, the danger of that myth is you take that ideal literally as being literally outside time and space and literally existing as a god or some kind of force or gods. And that gets you into all kinds of problems, trust me, on that one. Then but it's still a valid metaphor. Then you've got this metaphor of developing yourself. Very valid metaphor, extremely classically Buddhist metaphor, although there are other Buddhist metaphors. The danger of that metaphor, of course, is that you think, it's more jam tomorrow, isn't it? It's basically thinking, as long as I do the work now, I'll be happy in the future. And if you're not careful, the future never arrives. You're always doing things which are about, developing yourself for the future. Still a wonderful metaphor, very important metaphor, central to Buddhist understanding and to any genuine growing life. But it's got its problems. And then you've got this metaphor of self-discovery, very popular metaphor now. The great danger of that metaphor, and it's probably it's sort of prescient danger, and it's particularly dangerous now, is you don't think you have to make an effort. You take the metaphor literally, so you literally think, I just need to sort of sit there and discover it. And the metaphor tends to lead to, if you're not careful, to self-indulgence and to not taking the need for effort and not seriously enough. Just thinking it's kind of there, just thinking I just open my mouth and I'll sing like an angel. So we probably need some kind of, all of those metaphors need to be in play. So when I talk about the Buddha and the Buddha's enlightenment, I'm trying to talk about, in story form, that transcendent ideal. And I wanted you just to start with saying, to see how we might relate to it. Either we relate as, I'm moving towards that ideal, very valid way of thinking and vital, but with its own inherent shortcomings. Or I need to what's the word? I can't remember the word. Submit? No. Surrender, that's the word. I knew it began with S. I need to surrender to the ideal. Very valid, as long as you then don't make the Buddha a sort of God. Or I need to discover that Buddha within me. Valid again, as long as you understand what that means. So I want to just tell the story. I'll see how far I can get. I thought what I'll do is just tell the story and then say something about a way of seeing it, way of thinking about it for us. So first of all, the story then starts, doesn't it? Because we finished last week, you finished last week with the rose apple tree experience. See that dramatic way she's gone? There you go, finishing with that. So I won't go back to that. The Buddha to be, remember he's not a Buddha yet, he's Siddhartha. He walks off into the forest alone, and we see this motif again and again in his story. Being with others, valuing that becoming a limitation. At first he's with his very happy family and pleasure dome, and that becomes a limitation and he leaves it. And then he meets various teachers and various groups, but the limitation of the group, by which it means a kind of, if you're not careful, groups, if they're not careful, become a kind of prison. He then leaves that, yeah? And he walks off alone again into the forest, and he makes a great vow. He says something like, flesh may wither, but I will not get up from this place until I've gained enlightenment. So he sits under what became known as a Bodhi tree, a people tree, and he said, I'm not going to move again until I'm enlightened, or I'll die, one of the two. Yeah. So he makes this incredible commitment, and I did want to pause over that first. I might have to pause over each of them as I go through. It's interesting that it's quite clear what he says. Something like flesh may wither, blood may dry up, but I'll either die or I'm going to get enlightened, but I'm not going to move. Yeah. An incredible commitment. So what this highlights, what this highlights is the importance of commitment, and that really spiritual development, if that means anything at all, is always a development in commitment. And eventually, until one can make a commitment like that, I can't make that commitment. I just can't. I couldn't do that. I could say it, but I couldn't mean it. if you can imagine actually saying it and meaning it. That's unimaginable for us. The only way you could say that and mean it is you're completely integrated. The whole of you wants to do this, is determined, is set upon either solving the mystery of life or dying in that struggle. That's all of you wants to do that. That's what you want to do. Not for good religious reasons, not for health and well-being reasons, just because that's completely what you do. I mean, it's a staggering kind of commitment that is completely beyond most of us. I'd say probably all of us. One could say it, but before you know it, you get a bit uncomfortable. You think, hey, actually, I fancy lunch. Just have a sandwich. We really mean, we want. It's not that we don't want to go forward, but usually we do that in a quite one-sided way, inevitably, because we're not in charge of ourselves, we're not wholehearted. So to make that kind of commitment, you need to be wholehearted. It's why that in our tradition we emphasize before ordination, particularly concentrating on developing integration and wholehearted emotional positivity. Because only with those two things can you make anything like a commitment. Otherwise, you commit one day and you change your mind the next. Yeah? And you don't make progress in anything if you do that. There's so many. There's lots of artistic comparisons with that. I was, just for instance, taking one simple little example is Keats. Who lived just down the road from here. Very poor background. He was a small guy at school and used to get into fights all the time. One day they ran a poetry competition where I think you had to translate something from Greek or something, as you do. And he decided, and he never knew why, he decided to enter the competition. And he went from this boy who just used to fight all the time and never read, and he literally read every book in the library. So he would walk around the playground reading a book and then walk home reading a book. He read his whole way through the school library and then read and just dedicating himself to becoming a poet. And that was what he was going to do, what come what may. And that is what he did. Or, for instance, Matisse, an artist I'm very keen on, he was very, crushingly poor. He was married with a young daughter, crushingly poor in Paris, cold, hungry, with the butcher and the baker, lots of IOUs. And he did some quite conventional, quite pleasing still lives. And a dealer came and said, okay, if you can, I'll buy these off you, and I want one every week or so, one every two, and I'll give you some money each time for one of these, and I can sell these, So what Matisse did is he got his daughter to get these paintings and scrape off all the painting. And anything that looked like it was saleable, he got his daughter, she was about 8 at the time, to scrape off all the paint, so that he could use the canvas again. And he said that was for him the decisive moment. He just thought, I am not going to sell out. I am not going to do some nice thing for bourgeois middle-class people. I'm going to be an artist. It was a really, really risky strategy. Properly risky. People talk about taking risks, but that was like a real risk. So the Buddha's commitment is that exemplified. Come what may, I'm doing this. That's what I'm about. That's who I am. That's my very being. Most of us, none of us can do that. But to the degree we don't commit to something, we will not grow. It's very difficult, this teaching now, because modern life gives you so many options. There's so much it looks like you can do, and so many ways to waste time at the same time. It's very difficult, probably more difficult than ever, to commit to something. Because you want to also post an opinion on Facebook, tweet something. So very, very difficult thing. No, I'm going to just write. I'm going to do this, Very, very difficult now. And there's so many options. But without committing to something, whatever it is, you won't make progress with that something. Which will be fine when you're young, but as you get older, it becomes more and more tragic because you haven't really given your life to something. So you don't really grow, basically. So you get this incredible commitment an unimaginable commitment, really. He means it. It's not rhetoric. He means it. I'm not going to get up. Yeah. So according to the tradition, he then does the mindfulness of breathing, starts practicing the mindfulness of breathing, the meditations that you've already been doing. He watches his breath. His breath calms his body. The calmness of his body calms his mind. His emotions calm. He becomes more and more tranquil, more and more happy. His mind becomes more and more concentrated. He's already discovered the value of pleasure, a pleasure that's not connected with desire, a new kind of pleasure. He's allowing himself to experience that pleasure without grasping to it. So there's bliss, there's joy and so on, but he doesn't settle with that. He doesn't want that for himself. He can enjoy it, but he doesn't need to have it. Again, what we're trying to learn there is this discipline of pleasure. We can't live our life without pleasure. If you don't find higher pleasures, you'll want to have lower ones. There's no option in life. Anyway, so he's doing the mindfulness of breathing, and then more and more his mind opens up. Yeah, according to tradition, he sees all of his previous lives. In the suttas, it says, I saw myself being reborn in this place as this person eating this kind of food. Then I saw myself being reborn in that place as this sort of person eating this kind of food. Yeah? It all gets rather sort of, you have to add a lot of water to see what he's getting at here. But he sees, presumably in a moment, the whole drift and tendency of his lives. And again, this is a vital element of Buddhism that I haven't got enough time to go into, which is this doctrine of rebirth. Might be something that we'll be exploring as we go on. That Buddhism would find our modern Western idea of birth, life, a life which is a race towards death, which obliterates you. Buddhism would see that sort of view as trivial, ugly, point-missing, unimaginative, cynical. Yeah. Actually, the Buddha said later, that you can either imagine life going on forever, and that's wrong, deluded, and then he said, you can imagine that life ends with death and there's nothing after death at all, and he said that's wrong, deluded, but he added to that it's ugly. So slight sense that nihilism, in his view, was slightly worse, interestingly, that it was ugly. And it is very ugly, isn't it? Crass and ugly, as if you know, as if you know. It's outrageous, the metaphysical comments people make, like, life doesn't mean anything. You're thinking, and you are? As if you know, as if you know. People don't realise they stray into metaphysics when they start saying things like life doesn't mean something, when you die, that's at the end. They're fully metaphysical statements. It's just the same as saying when you die, you go straight to heaven. Everyone wants to say, I'm not sure about that. But now we can quite happy to say when you die, that's at the end. We're all like, yeah, whatever. But that is a fully metaphysical statement, and you don't know what you're talking about. Okay. I'm glad I got that off my chest. When I say you, I mean me as well. Anyway, where was I? So that's another subject, rebirth, which hopefully perhaps we'll explore. Sees all his previous life. And then what's interesting for me is that the only way to talk about it from now is to talk in terms of images and story. Very often images and stories say much more than theory. So what you get then is Siddhartha, still the Buddha to be, quite when Siddhartha, that in the text it's clear when he becomes a Buddha, but I wonder, I've got questions about that, but there he is sitting in meditation, and according to the story you have these hosts of demons that are trying to attack him. You sometimes see images, don't you, of the Buddha sitting in meditation, and then this sort of great circle of demonic forces around him with weapons and so on. Some of the descriptions are really lurid if you read some of the later descriptions, with fire coming out of their eyes and throwing mountains and all that kind of stuff. Basically it's the forces of hatred, the forces of malice, hatred, resentment, violence, cruelty, aversion. That whole force in reality, which is a force in the Buddha's own mind, Buddha's to be own mind, attacks that still point of meditation. And of course, we probably experienced that already in our own small way in meditation. You're just getting somewhere and then something aversive comes in. Yeah. And what happens, of course, is that those weapons, as they get thrown at the Buddha, they transform to flower petals and then drop around his feet. So something that's dangerous, mountains, daggers, hammers, they're all described, the weapons. They're not destroyed. There's not some sort of force field around the Buddha, which I always find very interesting. It's not some kind of superhero power he's got that, like a force field, like the X-Men. I think that's right. Anyway, getting a tiny bit more contemporary. What happens is that the weapons are transformed into flowers. In other words, something that's dangerous becomes a decoration, an adornment. Yeah? So all of those huge forces in the world and in human psyche, which we easily don't notice because we're so pampered, our lives are so cushioned most of the time, that we don't realise just how much innate aggression we have. Sometimes when you notice it, you think, gosh, the reason we don't notice it is because we're so protected from our own aggressions, because we can get what we like. I always say you're never more than 20 minutes away from a croissant. But actually here, you're never more than 3 minutes away from a croissant. So you can push lots of croissant and flat whites in my case between your naked desire to survive and reality. Yeah. Anyway, you've got these forces of hatred. So they become flowers, they're transformed to flowers. Also, I think possibly one thing we could learn from that myth is to notice our aversion more and be more honest about it. This is me hating. This is me feeling cruel. This is me being sanctimonious and pompous. This is me being opinionated and, all of that stuff. We need to start to own all that. It really can be quite shocking when you see how much aggression you have and how easily it is for it to be disguised as even kindness if you're not careful. I remember once when I was carrying Alex when she was a baby, and somebody bumped into me, and suddenly I was like a wolf. I could feel this rearing up of real protective aggression. Absolutely not. You do not do that. It's quite startling. But so often we don't notice it. Yeah? So perhaps part of the meaning of this for us is to start to notice our aggression and own up to it more, and not what we usually do to get away from it is to blame. We either blame other people or we blame ourselves. But both of them are a way of getting away from the fact that, good heavens, there's masses of aggression. And when I feel it, it's a really strong force. And it's a really strong force in our world. And somehow there's a consciousness that turns that into flowers, that doesn't push it back, that doesn't fight against it. There's a consciousness that turns that into flowers. There's a way of being, a way of consciousness that turns that into flowers, that turns that into something that you might make into a daisy chain around your neck. And then after that happens, again, you then usually translate it as Mara's daughters. You get these voluptuous figures of lust. Of course, this gets read foolishly and sort of again literally. What it means is all the forces of attachment, yearning, clinging, craving, wanting, desiring. The sharp end of that is lust, but it's also all of those forces that, those soft, quiet forces that make you want to settle down, that make you want to spend longer watching DVDs, that make you want to go to sleep. They're the forces of seduction that make you say, look, don't worry about all that. What are you worrying about? Come here, lovey. Hello, darling. It's that kind of force. And again, And none of us, let's be frank, are free of it. It's very, very strong in us, isn't it? Very, very strong. And if you're not careful, you sell your life because of it. You can sell your life because of it. So they're all, but again, the Buddha just sits there. In this case, he doesn't do anything at all. He just sits there. He just carries on meditating. He doesn't try to say, excuse me, do you mind? Can you put more clothes on? He doesn't do anything. He just carries on with what he's doing. He's already decided what he's doing. He's not doing something else. So all these seductive forces telling him to do something else, something more pleasurable, something pleasurable in a different way, he's actually already doing something, thanks. So they can't do anything to that. Yeah? And then finally, it's as if this great army with their voluptuous daughters, as it's often put, is led by a king called Mara. The name Mara means death, interestingly. So these forces of aversion, hatred, and so on, or wanting, craving, hankering, yearning, seduction, these two great forces are led by death. Who's in charge of those forces is death. I don't quite know the symbol of that, but it's very striking. Worth kind of reflecting on that. And what he then tries to do is he tries to undermine the Buddha to be by creating a sense of doubt. It's very striking that you've got these three great forces: hatred and its army, lust or hankering or craving and its army, and doubt. And literally Mara says, who do you think you are? How could you possibly imagine becoming a Buddha? Who and ever do you think you are? You're just a bloke. You're just a spoilt boy, He just sows doubt, tries to sow doubt in Siddhartha's mind. And interesting, you have the pattern of the five hindrances. Again, something you might have already studied, but the fifth is doubt, and it's often said to be the most pernicious, the deepest. This sense that of a lingering lack of commitment. I'm actually not sure that this is possible, and I'm actually not sure it exists. I'm not actually sure that I can step out of this me in the box called the world, time, space, causality, me, world. I'm not sure that if I step out of that, I'll step into anything but annihilation. That lingering doubt that if I let go of this being human, that nothing will be there, And Mara, death, tries to sow that doubt. And very, very striking what happens next, because Siddhartha, or the Buddha, I don't know what he is now. I always think of him as now the Buddha. He famously touches the floor, the ground, with his fingertips. So sometimes you quite often see that, the Buddha sitting touching the ground with his fingertips. And he calls the earth to witness. Very, very beautiful, because he touches the earth, and then what happens is that a little way off, an earth goddess arises from the earth. And as always with earth goddesses, they only arise up to their waist. They just arise out of the earth. For those of you who know Wagner's ring cycle, Erda is very similar sort of force. The earth goddess. She represents nature, by which I mean the laws of nature. She represents what can happen, if you see what I mean. So, in this universe, if I throw up a ball, it will drop down to my hand, or if I throw it far enough, it will describe a that thing. Huh?
Parabola.
Thank you. One of those. It'll describe. It won't stop in midair and sing a song. That's to do with the laws of nature, isn't it? And we've got various words for them. It just says that in this world, if you throw a ball, it will do that. If you stand under a tree, apple tree too long, an apple will fall on your head. That's just how it is. It's nothing to do with what you believe. It's nothing to do with theory. It's just, under these conditions, this can arise. That's what she represents. She represents what can be. In other words, she's saying she represents genuine possibility, not fantasy. Interestingly, if you think about it, she also could represent the imagination, because she's representing what can occur, not fantasy. And she says, I arise to witness to this man. He's been practicing. In other words, he's about to become. She actually says he's about to become a Buddha. He is ready. Now, what she's saying is, do you know what? If you get an apple pip and you plant it in the ground and you water it regularly and the ground is good enough and sunlight comes down and you spend a long time and little shoot will come up, and after a while you can put some fencing around that to protect that little shoot, and that little shoot gets bigger, and then and eventually you get an apple, yeah? And that's what will happen if all those conditions are in place. So she's saying all of the conditions are in place for a Buddha to arise. That's what she's saying. She's saying, just as you can plant that apple pip, and if the conditions arise, an apple will arise. That's there. That will happen. Again, you see that in that is the myth of self-discovery. In that little apple pip is an apple. In the right conditions, that apple will arise. That apple tree will arise. She's saying that applies to this guy. Yeah? All of the conditions have been right, so the apple will arise. In this case, the apple is the Buddha, the apple of humanity. Yeah? That will arise. And it will arise because that's got to arise, because that's nature. Just as apples appear, waves turn, swallows fly to Africa, and so on, a Buddha can arise in the world. Under certain conditions, a Buddha can arise in the world. Yeah. I wanted to also just mention a last image of the Enlightenment, which is that, again, the Buddha's still sitting there, the earth god has disappeared, everything, I imagine that everything's completely quietened down. The army has been destroyed, great hatred, lust, any kind of lingering doubt that stepping out of this is going to be safe, as it were, safe in inverted commas. This sense of the apple, as it were, arising, this incredible quiet in the middle of the jungle. And then it starts to pour with rain. And rain itself is symbolic. Traditionally, when you in a coronation of a king or a queen, you pour water on their head, and it tends to symbolise the unconscious, or the powers of the unconscious, and that you're baptising someone with the powers of the unconscious. So it's an image for conscious and unconscious running together in one stream. Yeah? So it starts to pour with rain, and then what happens is this great king cobra slithers out of the undergrowth, a huge cobra, massive cobra. And this cobra winds himself around the Buddha, sitting in meditation, and opens his hood, his cobra's hood, above the Buddha's head, sheltering him from the rain. Yeah? Incredible image. So one of the things I really like about that is that Buddha is not meek and mild. He's not gentle Jesus, meek and mild. The image for the Buddha here is a king cobra, and a king cobra of really terrifying dimensions. Again, do you see how it's the same metaphoric play? We had armies, now we get this terrifying creature, probably one of the most dangerous creatures in the world, becoming a protector of the Buddha, becoming this incredible courtesy of just making sure that the Buddha doesn't get wet. You know what I mean? I mean, presumably it's not a problem for the Buddha. But something that is terrifying and dangerous, like a dragon, and sometimes he's portrayed almost like a dragon, is actually courteously, sort of, as it were, holding a parasol. And do you see how that's exquisitely devotional, exquisitely refined? But it's a cobra doing that. So that sort of reverence, that sort of exquisite sense of manners, almost reverence, that's being done by a cobra. That's, in other words, it's saying that's where real strength lies, not in machismo or and so on, but in that kind of exquisite reverence. And then, the rain stops, the cobra unwinds itself from the Buddha, suddenly is transformed into a boy, who then bows to the Buddha and disappears. Yeah. So I want to I think we'll finish here soon anyway. Those are the images I want to say, and I think I want to say, and perhaps we'll extend this next week, because I want to also think that the Enlightenment isn't finished yet. It is sort of, but it's not yet. There's something absolutely crucial that's not to happen and won't happen for quite a while in this story. But remember, enlightenment isn't a thing. It's not, okay, I wasn't, now I am. Some kind of new consciousness has arisen. And I want to think of that new consciousness, because remember, we're still in the world of a parable, of a kind of Disney story. And that new consciousness has all of those elements in it. It's not really sequential as it is in a story. That sequentialism here is telling you about that consciousness. So first of all, whatever that new consciousness is that's embodied in this figure is one of complete commitment. It's absolutely committed, and not for any other secondary reason, good for me, valuably spiritual, save the world even, for no good reason. This is what I'm about. This is my meaning of being. This is all I'm into. This incredible intrinsic commitment. Yeah, that's trying to get you to understand one element of that consciousness. Another element of that consciousness is saying that there's been this incredible practice of recognizing hatred for what it is and not casting it out through Facebook or wherever it is we do it nowadays, in blame, or even blaming yourself, recognizing what it is and turning the energy of hatred into a daisy chain, into an adornment. That something about that consciousness is so powerful, even the forces of hatred and violence which are tearing our world apart are transformed into flowers, into adornments. Yeah? It's also a consciousness in which there is nothing else that you want. Nothing else is wanted. There is no trace of discontent. There's no hankering after anything. This experience is so rapturously complete that nothing else attracts your attention, even for a moment. Your attention is wholly taken up with the experience. Nothing else interests you. And again, not for religious reasons, just because that's just the nature of that state of consciousness. And then there's not a trace in that nature of consciousness of doubt that egotism is a small place that we lock ourselves in and frighten ourselves. That this being me in this world, there's no doubt that that's an illusion in this consciousness. Absolutely no doubt. Because it's not like that. In that moment, you've escaped self in a world, time and space, causality and so on. You've left that. So there's no question of doubting that, because you know that selfhood is an illusion. The world is an illusion. Time and space is an illusion. All the things that you thought were dangerous are illusions. All the things you thought were attractions are illusions. You've got the back of the watch off. You can see a wholly different way of understanding everything. And because of that state of consciousness, because you know that, every possible psychic energy is released. And that energy is best imagined as a king cobra, as the biggest, most fearful-looking snake you've ever seen. That all the energies of the human psyche are completely released because they're not locked into a little box called me. in a little box called the world.